Please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Swager?
Here.
Mrs. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Benton?
Here.
Mrs. Brewer?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
Thank you. Reading of the notice of the meeting.
This is a public meeting of the Board of Education for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There's a time for public participation during the meeting as indicated in the agenda. Each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 3 minutes. Upon request of the superintendent, the district shall make reasonable accommodation for a person with a disability to be able to participate in this activity. I could read faster if that.
There's crickets in the
No,
background.
I'll do the speed rate. Okay, let me finish this. A recording shall be made of each meeting. A recording shall be made of each meeting of the board as administrative aid and shall be preserved as public documents of the board.
It made me chuckle. I thought it was funny.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
All right. Additions or deletions to the agenda?
So I have 3 changes to the board agenda tonight. If you look at resolution 24-06-108, that is consent agenda. What I'd like to do is add 2 resolutions. Currently it ends at H, and I'd like to add the monthly financial report. And I believe Mrs. Drummy handed you a copy of that, or it's at your table. And then also I want to add J, and it'll be a resolution for the Greater Johnstown Parks and Recreation Board of Trustees. And I also gave you a paper copy of that resolution as well. And then on resolution 24-06-116, that's a stipend or training for our teachers for 3 of our staff. And we were just alerted by the State Department of Education that we need 4 days of training, not 2. So it'll be 3 staff times 4 days instead of 3 staff by 2 days, which is what is in the agenda. And those are the changes I have. So again, 108 and 108 and 116 are the changes.
Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Any discussion, questions? Call the roll.
Mrs. Thomas first?
Yes,
Oh,
ma'am.
Mrs. Brewer. I was like, no.
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes. Prepared remarks by the public. Jessica Ryan.
Don't start my time yet, Dr. Wagner. Give me a second. Okay. Okay. Good evening. My name is Jessica Ryan. I'm an educator in this district, but also the wife of a coach, the parent of 2 JHS high school students, and a lifelong fan of the hundreds of students I have had the privilege of teaching throughout my career here in Johnstown. On the evening of May 24th, like all of you, I was in attendance at our 2024 high school graduation. I was standing along the top row of Frank Chambers Stadium when I heard a commotion. Seconds later, we heard a voice loudly state, "There is an emergency, we need the AED." A grandparent of one of our graduates was having a serious medical crisis. Immediately, medical professionals in attendance responded and began life-saving measures that included the need for the AED. While I was still processing the comment that we heard about the need, our very own JIS PE teacher and high school track coach, Melissa Dyer, had already reacted, obtained the AED from our trainer's office, and was on her way to deliver it. It was less than 30 seconds from the time the request was made to the AED being in the hands of the gentleman beginning to use it. Thankfully, it worked. To say that I felt relief at its success and gratitude for all who reacted quickly and participated in administering life-saving measures would be an understatement. I'm certain that is true for all of us in attendance that evening. However, my relief and gratitude were quickly replaced with dismay when I learned that the AED that was utilized that evening is the same one from the same location in our athletic trainer's office that would need to be used if there was a similar emergency at the JHS baseball or softball fields. When I inquired about the locations of other AEDs, I was told there is one in the high school band room that could be used at the baseball field if the high school was unlocked. Could and if didn't ease my concern, nor did that explanation include the softball field. So I immediately began to wonder just how much longer than the 30 seconds of graduation night it would take to get the AED to the baseball or softball field in the event of an emergency. So later that week, I took my high school freshman, technically I guess a sophomore, but I don't want to be rushed, to help me find out. Liam is a 4-sport athlete, including a sprinter and high jumper for the track team this past spring. I had him run from home plate of the baseball field to get the AED in our trainer's office and run back. We did the same thing from the softball field, home plate to the AED and back. It took him, an athlete in excellent shape, 2 minutes and 30 seconds to run from home plate of the baseball field and back, and 4 minutes and 14 seconds to do the same at the softball field. Despite his repeated requests to attempt to beat his time, he had proven the point. It's way too far away. I would love to pause now and have us wait 4 minutes and 14 seconds, imagining a parent, grandparent, spouse, or any loved one in cardiac arrest, but we can't because that 4 minutes and 14 seconds is actually longer than the amount of time I'm allowed to speak tonight. Why does this matter? National average of response time of an ambulance after a 911 call is 7 to 10 minutes. 9 minutes after a cardiac arrest, brain damage is highly likely. 10 minutes after a cardiac arrest, the chance of survival is highly unlikely. I have like 30 more seconds. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. In contrast, if a defibrillation occurs within the first minute of collapse from cardiac arrest, as it thankfully was the night of graduation, the survival rate is close to 90%. But if that defibrillation occurs closer to the 5-minute mark of cardiac arrest, as it likely would if it occurred at either our baseball or softball field, the survival rate drops to 50 to 70%, with the number decreasing by 10% for every minute they are in cardiac arrest. So my request tonight is that you as a board evaluate the locations and ease of accessibility of the AEDs in our district, ensuring any Johnny loved one, or guest on our grounds could receive the necessary quick emergency care from an AED that ensures the very best chance of survival and recovery. Thank you so much. Go Johnnies.
Thank you. I don't, just for the public to comment, we are looking at it. We're aware of it and looking into it as we renovate the baseball field down there, the locker room. We're looking where softball's a little more challenging. It's securing them too. It's not just finding, it's where to secure. It's the bigger issue of once you do obtain it, where do you put it that you can count on it still being there when you need it. So that's more of the challenge. So we have to evaluate that softball field a little closer to feel where we can locate on that. So that'll be the harder location to place one. And of course, it's only as available as everyone that knows about them and where they're at. So that's the education side that the athletic director will deal with at the coaches meetings. So thank you. All right, moving on to presentations.
Yes, we have 2 presentations tonight. The first one will be curriculum and instruction adoption, and that'll be Mrs. Debbie Seibel, and she's talking about our K-5 reading. I know the board spent some time on this at our last work session, but we thought we should do one more review so that the board, if the board has any questions, because you're tonight requested to approve a resolution related to this. So, Mrs. Seibel?
Thank you. As you know, as we talked earlier this year, that under ORC 3313-6028, beginning with the 24-25 school year, districts must use core curriculum in English, language arts, and reading intervention materials from a list established by the department. So this evening, a little bit later on your agenda, you're going to see a recommendation to adopt Wit and Wisdom as our core curriculum for grades K through 5. You also probably remember we had a Wit and Wisdom overview at the, I believe it was the March 18th board work session. It was one of the presentations that you got to see. And a little bit about the process. We began working last fall, reviewing a lot of the curriculum that was out there, bringing vendors in to present to staff and to administrators. And then we also had site visits in May that were extremely helpful. Following the 2 site visits we had, we looked at all the feedback and we're pleased this evening to bring a recommendation a little bit later to adopt Wit and Wisdom as our K-5 English Language Arts core curriculum. In your packets, I placed a copy of the quote if anybody wants to look at that. The second item in the agenda that you'll see a little bit later on is a recommendation to approve the purchase of Foundation's consumable materials for the 24-25 school year. And as you know, we adopted Foundations, which is just the foundational part of the reading program, grades K to 3, 2 years ago. So we've completed the second year of Foundations implementations, but each year we have to order the consumable materials for the following year. So that's the second resolution that you'll see in a little bit. Questions about the process or the recommendations? We visited Bexley to see Wit and Wisdom, and we visited Buckeye Valley to look at another vendor's product. We also have talked to quite a few schools that have used Wit and Wisdom. Heath City Schools, Newark had a pilot. They're going into full adoption next year, and Granville will be adopting next year, Wit and Wisdom as well next year.
What's the training time for teachers?
That is a great question. So one of the things that came out in March was a revised timeline for schools to meet the letter of the law, and it allows next year to be an implementation year. So if this is approved this evening, we will order the materials, and then in September, at our September 20th PD date, Wit and Wisdom will come in and start to train. At our October 18th PD, they will come back and do another training. We are going with a slower rollout. We know that teachers are going to need some time. This is a big lift for our reading and English language arts teachers. So they're going to need some time to get materials in their hand, to get the training. So we will continue to train all year. Teachers may begin using, and as soon as we get through that September 20th PD, but August of 2025 is when we'll have full 100% implementation.
Could you address any supplemental books or reading that's going to be implemented or a partner in this program? Any library books, whatever kind of books might be used? Or are there? Maybe the question is, are there?
So with Wit and Wisdom, they have a set of core text. And one of the things that we really liked about Wit and Wisdom is that the students will actually have real books in their hands. It's not a vendor written material. And if there are books in there that we think we could find a better replacement for, there is the opportunity to do that make a substitution with Wit and Wisdom. So, yeah.
And then the question I have is, and it's probably on the spreadsheet, but there's lots of numbers. For the Wit and Wisdom, about what percentage will be like annual, right? So I know a lot of the cost up front will be one time, but as far as like consumables annually, or is this something we're thinking will stretch 2, 3, 5 years?
That's a good question. The quote that you have in front of you, that's the entire 5-year cost.
5 years.
Yeah. That's a little bit different from Foundations. Foundations, we do have that consumable each year that we have to purchase. But for Wit and Wisdom, That's the 5-year total. I will add too that we did receive from the state an HQIM, high quality instructional material, sorry about that, subsidy allocation this year to go towards that. That amount doesn't cover all of it, but it was sizable. It was a little over $77,000 that we can apply towards that, towards those reading materials, and that's what it was intended for. No, that's, yes. So I believe we've already received that allocation from the state, so that $77,000 can go towards this purchase. That's
It's just a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence.
Okay. Sorry.
yeah, close, coincidental.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's really close to the amount. The actual amount was $77,064.60. But that is very, very much a coincidence. Any other questions? Thank you.
Ready for the next presentation? Ready for the next presentation? Okay. Next, we want to talk about district calendars. I know the board reviewed this at the work session, but we thought it'd be good to bring it back more time. And then later tonight, there also is a resolution for this. As a reminder, next year's calendar and the following year's slight alteration. Mr. Busenberg will talk about that. And then we're also showing the board the 26-27 calendar. I know you've seen that. And I know Mr. Busenberg will talk about the committee that we have formed and some work we've received from the teaching team.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak a little bit about calendars tonight. Zooming out a little bit, we do have a committee structure to look at district calendars. That is comprised of some teachers from each of the buildings and part of the administrative team. And typically we're looking at schedules that are 3 years out. So this year, this academic school year, we're looking at the 26-27 calendars. The board has already approved, as Dr. Wagner said, the 24-25, 25-26, and now this is our first look at the 26-27 school year calendar. One of the things that's a bit unusual, each of you has a packet in front of you with each of these three. So you'll see a white calendar, that is the 24-25. Then you'll see a purple calendar, that's 25-26, and then blue is the 26-27, the one that you haven't voted on yet. When we reviewed the calendar, typically we're just looking at the one that's 3 years out, but we noticed a change with that 26-27 in the way we structure our professional development days in March that we really liked, and we thought we wanted to bring it back for 24-25 and 25-26 and have the board reconsider that. So what those are is it takes the 24-25 March PD day from March 14th to March 21st, and then the 25-26 from March 13th to March 27th. And essentially what that does is it moves that March PD day to the Friday before spring break. So we tend to see lots of parents want to get out of town a day early. They extend spring break a little bit. And so it allows us to have a 4-day week, a professional development day, and really the students get an extra day of spring break. And the committee really liked that, and the teachers brought that up, and we thought it was a good idea. And so that is reflected on the calendars in front of you for 24, 25, 25, 26, and then built into the 26, 27. The 26, 27, some things that will be helpful to know, it mirrors almost exactly the 25, 26 calendar that we worked on, largely the same committee last year. We felt really good about that calendar, and we were able to mirror it for 26, 27. So there's a crosswalk that you'll see. It's the last thing you have. And it's just a real easy way to see the comparisons between the 2 years, what we approved last year and what we're recommending for 26, 27, that pretty much everything just moves back one day. The start date moves back a day. Each of the breaks moves back one day, but pretty easy to see. Graduation moves back a day. One thing I would draw your attention to, really, it was a pretty relatively simple calendar to work on, but the committee did spend a lot of time. Probably the biggest issue was the start date. So instead of first day for students being August 13th, it's August 12th. And so we start getting earlier and earlier and earlier. One of the challenges, well, there's a lot of challenges with starting a week later. We looked at that. If you start a week later, we usually try to balance first and second semester. So they're about the same number of days. Particularly at the high school and middle school, you have teachers teaching semester courses. You would go from what we currently have in the proposed, which is 86 days in the first semester and 89 in the second, to 81 in the first and 94 in the second. So that's a difference of 13 days. That's approaching 3 weeks difference for those same semester classes. You would have that class first semester, second semester. We like second being a little bigger because of calamity days, but not that much different. The other thing that most of the secondary staff really prefers is not bringing second semester after winter break. You can do that for a week or two, but when you're talking about exams and trying to wrap things up, it makes it really tricky. The other thing that's really gained in popularity is our CCP population. So if we're offering those in-house, those professors are done December 12th, December 8th, they follow the college schedule. So if you're then kind of, those kids really don't have a lot to do and you extend that past break, that gets really challenging. So I think everyone was in agreement that would like to start later, but when you look at the practicality and the impact it has, particularly on the secondary schedule, we agreed that it made sense to kind of mirror the 25, 26, and we just start a day earlier. At some point, and I haven't looked beyond, we'll hit a natural reset where everything, the winter break, everything will move back and we can start a week later, but we're just not there yet. So I know that's a lot, and we talked about a decent amount of that already, but are there any specific questions?
Question. Did the committee take into account the number of kids participating in the Hartford Fair? I don't know the fair numbers here, but was that a part of the consideration?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yep. I don't think we had concrete numbers, but that is absolutely a consideration. In fact, I remember someone saying, "Is that the Hartford Fair?" And then they looked it up and it was just after that, but we know we're getting close to that. So
Mr. Busenberg, also, I think when that conversation occurred that we try to accommodate where we can, especially if students are trying to show.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So we'll be graduating on not a Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, that will be the first time. It's interesting
never-
because that year, that Memorial Day, if you look at, instead of being on the 25th, it resets to the 31st, and then it will follow. And so a week later start would be difficult at semester change, but would have you line up with Memorial Day. So that was, the date is one day different than the year before, but it just, because of the holiday reset, it doesn't line up. So
Well,
Never done that. I think it'll actually be okay.
it goes back and forth. I mean, some people like it because they're traveling from out of state and they like to come in. It, like anything.
Yep.
It works for some people and doesn't work for others. It's something I'm not aware of us, at least in my time here, not having.
no, I don't think in my
graduation on
time either. No.
Memorial Day.
The committee, I want to underscore, the committee went back and forth on this, but the issue really is a semester break. And it gets hardest for high school because otherwise, if we adjust that calendar too much, then you'll come back from winter break and probably have your exams about a week after that. Then it makes it difficult. The high school does kind of drive that in many respects. And like you said, the imbalance, I think you said 81 to 94 days, right?
Right. If you were to
In the
start
semesters.
5 days later, yeah, but still try to end before winter break, because that was
Right.
the suggestion, was could we just end before winter
Yeah.
break, start 5 days later, and that's actually a 10-day swing.
Yeah.
because you're taking away and adding. So,
Questions? Comments?
okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Committees? We didn't have buildings, grounds, and safety. We didn't have communications. We haven't had curriculum, but we will at some point. Finance, we haven't needed, but we did have insurance. And then Mrs. Boer and Mrs. Thomas, is it okay if we give the report? Because I know there was some schedule. Mrs. Drummy has some summary notes. It was mostly on reporting on loss ratios and how our plan was trending.
Our brokers from Gallagher came out for that meeting, and it was the larger committee meeting, and reported on our loss ratios for the new year as well as the last 12 months. So our loss ratios are running a little bit hotter than expected. Our plans are over 150% in that recent time frame. But in the longer time frame, looking at the last 12 months, we're more at 115%, which is where we've been for the last couple of years. What's driving those high marks in the short term are some high-cost claimants. This time last year, we had only 4 claims compared to 10 large claims, over 25,000. So that is something that it's everybody takes their turn sort of at that, utilizing our benefits. And that is a function of the delay of getting care with COVID. And they're seeing this in all plans across their book of business, that there are higher loss ratios. Thankfully, we are part of an insurance consortium, and we have an unwritten rule of a 15% increase in our premiums. So even though we might be running a little bit hotter than a 15, and we still have 6 months to go. So we still have a long way to go. But it is nice to know that we have that cap written in there, unwritten, but implemented. Dental losses have been a little bit better at about 110% on average. We also discussed some enhancements to our health plan. The committee was very interested in implementing a health fair, sort of reinvigorating that. We also talked about underutilized benefits, which one of them is dispatch health. And most of the group did not know this was a benefit, where a physician or nurse assistant will actually, you call the number, they come to your house. And it's paid out the same as if a person had gone to just a urgent care office. So it's a fantastic benefit.
Was the question asked on a dispatch care? When we called, we were out of the area. So in Johnstown, I would like to know, will dispatch care address people here?
Well,
I
believe-
it does. I'm just saying it didn't. So
yeah.
I'd like to know if it does, and maybe we
Sure.
got someone from the field to answer the phone. I don't know.
Well, we did have one person on the committee who used it.
Okay.
And do you remember who that was? Does she
Yeah.
live in town?
Yeah.
Or out of
Yeah,
town?
it lives in Leafydale. And I do think it depends on the specialization though, too. So I think that was part of what she found, but we can get more information about that.
We certainly will. So we are also looking into the health fair, and there are 2 options for a health fair that we could utilize. One would be to go through approved vendors that are part of our insurance plan, like Quest, and then those screenings would be processed as claims. So that's very convenient for staff. In addition, it gets charted in their records for their physician. Alternative to that, we could also use our local health department or hospital. The disadvantage of that, it wouldn't get processed as conveniently for the staff member as a claim, and it would not be in their health record, but it is a lot more flexible. So we're going to continue as far as scheduling, but we'll continue to explore those 2 options. And it's exciting really to think that we have these benefits that are underutilized, and if we can bring them on site so that it's more convenient for staff to especially do wellness screenings and checks. Those are important to prevent diseases. Anything else you'd like to
No,
add?
I think that it was a long and complicated meeting, but I think you did a good job summarizing.
I'm just happy to hear about the health fairs because we've worked on that for many years, trying to bring those back into focus, and they kept slipping away. So I think they're very good. We identify a lot of things like high blood pressure and things that people didn't know they needed to take care of, specific ones that they're involved in homeowners. So it's real positive. In fact, some years we even gave gifts for people who, a Subway sandwich or whatever to people who participate, because we want them to do that.
So there used to be wellness dollars that were available that we could help incentivize that, and those dollars have dried up from the carriers anyway. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't help and get creative. Yeah, ask some of our vendors to help support that as well.
So our target overall as a district is to try to get that below 110. I mean, what is our goal? I mean, obviously, we have a 15% cap, but that doesn't mean people can't stay in business if they're losing money even with our cap. So eventually we're paying for it at some point.
We're triggering that. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can't keep triggering the cap and then losing money.
Right.
No one's in business to lose money. So at what point,
What's our break even?
yeah, what's our break even?
We haven't really discussed past that. Knowing that we have the cap, we're probably 18 months away from facing that sort of decision of what if these trends continue where utilization is very high, then we'll have to talk about what to do, but we have not talked about that yet.
Typically, my experience has been you want to run somewhere at least in the 85 to 90% range is where you want to typically trend. But, the fact we're in a consortium helps with some of that, but it is running,
We're
very,
at 150 and we want to be 85 to 90. That's considerably high.
yeah.
It is considered. We're actually over.
Without the consortium, one year we paid $800,000 additional. Then it went to $300,000. We think that was a bargain, but none of those are bargains. Way
Yeah.
too expensive. So.
And I believe we've been running high for a number of years.
We have.
We
That's
have.
what we
And
use the
that's
cap.
why I'm
That's why
surprised.
I get nervous because
Yes.
we keep running up against the cap. That's what's saving us. At
Saved
some
us for
point,
multiple years.
It
Some
saved
point in
us.
time, we're going to get kicked out of the
Correct.
consortium.
that's my bigger
Yeah.
concern.
Last year ran a little better, if you recall, it's the first time in some time. We also, remember, we put a lot of time as we even looked at self-funding, but we're nowhere near that now. We're going to have to stay with the consortium right now.
Well, get healthy, everybody.
Yeah.
Go to the health fair,
Right.
whatever that is.
All right. Thank you.
And then policy,
Yeah, I was able to meet with Mr. Busenberg. We looked at 7 policies. They're pretty straightforward. We focused on transportation policies. He was able to look at sort of cleaning some of those up now that to reflect sort of the changes that we have in the transportation department, making sure that our policies are in line with where we are. And then the other ones were in relation to graduation, just some small little changes in those.
All right, thank you.
and then we had our ad hoc committee with strategic planning, economic development, construction. And we did meet on the 23rd, and we met from 2:30 until about 6 p.m., starting at 3. And on the hour, we met with 3 different construction firms, and we had interviews and had an opportunity to hear from each of the construction firms and looking at our construction manager at risk model. I won't go into too much detail because I know the board has seen it. And then later tonight, there's a resolution that recommends one of those firms to move forward. In part is due to the interview and what we learned at that interview. I have to say, though, that all 3 firms were very excited about Johnstown and the school district and did a great job. Actually, it was very, on the rubric, very close between the 3. That good, Mr. Swagger?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And technology did not meet, but LPDC did meet. And I'll report on that. So the team met on June 3rd, and those in attendance, Stephanie Stuckey, Laura Kurtz, Renee Britton, Annette Price, Ben Jagger, and Derek Busenberg. They looked at the individual professional development plans for 8 teachers, and they approved all 8 of those. They did look at another one, a 9th, and then that's returned for modification. So that'll come back at the next meeting. We also look at license renewals, and 3 of the staff members met the credentialing criteria for license renewals. So those were approved for their hours were approved. Then they looked at contact hours, and those are that's when staff is involved with or are involved with professional development. They have to make sure it aligns with their growth plans. They also looked at, and I won't read all the names, but looked at some of the staff who are retiring and resigning, and then they help with exit reports. If they're continuing education, there's a reciprocity process, I guess, that follows, so they'll prepare for that. Looked at calendars, and they set up a calendar schedule for the coming school year, which is quite robust. And then they are expecting, they don't always have a July meeting, but it looks like there will be a July 12th LPDC meeting, at least to process one staff member's license renewal and anything else they can at that time. But that's the high level over. Got a third page, sorry. And then they had a couple other pending licenses that they worked on. And then they're also looking at reviewing the bylaws and how that impacts substitute teachers through our local professional development committee. I think that's it. And the next meeting after the July one will be August 8th.
All right. Any questions, comments on the reports? Moving on to the consent agenda.
Okay, consent agenda. For the consent agenda, it's resolution 24-06-108. And I do want to call the board's attention to the 2 items that we added. So on the original publication, you'll see that we ended with H, approval of science and reading stipends. But then we also added an I, which will be monthly financial report that you have a copy of. And then also J, which will be the Greater Johnstown Parks and Rec, and I can read that resolution when we get to that point. Do you want me to just go through these other resolutions? Yep, I'm sorry.
If I can get a motion,
I'll make the motion.
we get a second.
I'll second it.
Discussion.
Let me jump in with the summary. Mrs. Wagner, do you want to introduce our staff member? Who's on the list there? Kathleen, do you want to give a quick update about her?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So we'll welcome her. You'll see here in the resolution. Also, we have some resignations to process, and I can't cover everyone, but I do want to highlight a few. Mark Flesher is retiring after 8 years. Predates me, but he came here as a retired teacher. He's been in numerous roles, always happy to help out. He supported our online program. He's also very involved in many volunteer activities, including sporting activities and events. So we're sorry to see him go, but we understand that he has next steps in life in retirement. And then Christy Rose has been here a long time, so I have a few words to share about her. She's been here 28 years. So she started in the 96-97 school year. And she started way back in Adams, and then as a resource teacher for special needs. And her sole assignment was working in education, of course. She has many strengths. I won't go through all of them, but she's always committed to her students. Talk about her heart and all this. She's always taken on challenging students, and sometimes those with identified needs. She shows a very engaged process, and we appreciate that. Always has a sense of humor. I know I've dealt with her a little bit, but I know from Mrs. Allmendinger she shares that. And that she also was a former You Make a Difference award winner, and that she's been a guiding light, kind of the matriarch, they said, at the middle school for some time, so we certainly will miss her. And then we have a couple other resignations, Madeline Miller and then Amy Schultze, who's rehired, or was rehired, but is retiring again. For administrative employment, we realized Craig McDonald's contract expired. We kind of slipped by, so we thought we want to continue his services. So
Since he's here, it'd be
Yeah.
awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. But Craig has done a nice job. I can go on and on about communications, but we've really, everything is
It took
advertised.
us to a new level.
Yep. We talked about Kathleen already. Classified employment. This is just basically going back and cleaning up some of our records. So we have Kathy Sharp. She's been a substitute secretary. Sometimes we hire staff through Wren Hill, our contracting firm, or sometimes in the district. So that kind of cleans things up there on that item. Next, we have some parent volunteers. You can see some of those are backdated, and that was after the last board meeting, but before the end of the school year. We have our board minutes there. We have 2 sessions that. Approval of the science or reading stipends. I know the board has heard about that in the past. And then also have the additional item, the monthly financial report. Again, you have a copy of that. And then J is for the Greater Johnstown Parks and Rec. And if I could read that resolution, it would be good. It'll be to appoint Francia to the Greater Johnstown Parks Recreation District Board of Trustees to serve the remainder of Ed Baldwin's term that expires August 15, 2025, in accordance with the City of Johnstown-Monroe Local School District agreement and bylaws that were adopted in March of 2021. So just as a point of clarification, Frank would serve about a year because we've had Ed's position open. And I think that's everything in consent unless there's questions.
Comments, questions from anybody? We've all seen all of this. Obviously, we'll miss Christy and Mark, or not all of them, but they've all been around a long time. I see Mark quite often when I'm at the high school. Craig, I was joking with you, right? All right. Call the roll.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer.
Yes.
On to the treasurer's recommendations.
There are several recommendations this evening. The first resolution, 24-06-109, would be for approval of donations. And those donations, would you like me to read those?
Yes, please.
Alice Main, $200 to the James Worther Citizenship Award. Lawrence and Sharon Poole, $100 to the James Worthen Citizenship Award. Melanie Main, $100 to the James Worthen Citizenship Award. The Johnstown Athletic Boosters, $10,000 for the purchase of lacrosse helmets. Terry Priest and family, $1,000 to establish the Joyce Wagner Priest Salutatorian Scholarship. And John and Jeffrey Kessler, $2,500 for the James and Patricia Kessler Foundation Scholarship. And this would be the second award for that. They actually donated $2,500 a month ago.
The last one. Yep.
So we're very grateful for those donations.
Can I get a motion?
So moved.
And can I get a second?
I'll second.
Comments?
I think it's exciting that we see 2 of our past principals, the families that served the community over many years, the families still honor their presence here, and the families are very supportive of all the things that we're doing in the school district. So that would be Mr. Kessler, Chuck Kessler. We have our grandchildren sitting here.
I don't want to leave out Terry Priest either. He was a longtime teacher in our district too. Whose families now remembering us with the next scholarship.
Yes, very nice.
I want to thank them all for their
All right. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Brewer,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Abstain.
Mr. Swager.
Yes. And for clarification, he has to abstain because of her daughter. She's not
And
against
we're
it.
very thankful.
Yes.
We're very thankful.
I just want to make
Quite a
sure.
surprise.
Yeah. Make sure everyone didn't think you were abstaining like you were against any of these. All right. Moving on to the next resolution.
Next resolution, 24-06-110, to authorize the request of real estate advances. This would be for settlement payments of tax year 23 assessments collected during the second half of 24.
If I can get a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
A second.
Any discussion? This is pretty routine for us to request our money. It used to just happen. Now we have to request it.
Yes.
Right.
And we used to be able to make the request once a year as a standing request, but now they require it at least twice a year.
No room for assuming.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benson?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-111, authorized transfer to athletic fund. This would be a transfer from the general fund to the athletic fund in an amount not to exceed $55,000 as necessary to bring the fund balance to zero on June 30, 24.
Can I get a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Discussion?
Yeah,
Motion.
we've been running a deficit for a number of years. We talked about it in the finance committee, and I think we're going to talk to the athletic, our new athletic director, trying to get on that. And we've been using some of the funding that we received from COVID to put that whole. But
A lot of it's
we don't have
accounting.
it
We just have to actually setting up an athletic budget, using it, separating it all out will be helpful.
And I think they're in the process of doing it. She's in the process of talking about that.
Yep. Thank you. Any
And
other
based
questions?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, based on the current activity, the transfer would be $29,031. But we still have some encumbrances outstanding, so that's why we ask for up to, but I will only transfer what's exactly necessary and report on what that amount was next month.
All right, thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benson?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-112, authorize transfers, advances, and account modifications as necessary to balance the books to close fiscal year ending June 30, with any changes in transactions to be reported at the next regular meeting.
Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Any discussion on this? Pretty routine.
It is pretty routine. I did deliver to you tonight so you could have a sense of where we're at. I kept a copy for myself. It's appropriations and receivables compared so that you can see where we stand right now. This would be the status of our books for both appropriations and estimated resources. So based on this activity, which will be the next resolution item, I don't anticipate any additional transfers and advances at this time. Something could pop up, for instance, those reading stipends that you authorized earlier. We requested that funding from ODE today. They may or may not, today was their cutoff. If they don't fund it, then that might be a temporary advance that I would fund and then bring to you in July. But I'm not anticipating anything at this time. We got all of our cash requests submitted.
All right, thank you. Call the roll, please.
Can you just tell them why we're doing this end of the year?
Right.
Can you explain that to the public?
Sure. So what happens is we have to submit all of our final books to the county auditor on the 30th. Well, in order to get everything ready for that, we would have to stop doing business. And, to report and have final numbers tonight for the board, we may or may not be able to keep doing business. So because we have payroll right up until the 30th, we have other bills that we'll keep paying. Something could pop up that could cause maybe a budget account that it goes even $1 negative. It has to be fixed before it can be submitted to the auditor. So this gives some flexibility for us to keep paying all the bills, processing payroll, any new purchase commitments that might come up for emergencies to get through the month of June, especially with maintenance. It gives us some flexibility to keep that process operational.
Okay, any questions?
The question I have with your appropriation for receivables, I look at the scholarship monies and the donations and so forth. Those that I well recognize as signature in our budget. Are we writing to those people and letting them know where they are with what it looks like today, what we distributed to them this year, and encouraging them to keep up the wonderful cooperation with our school? Are we doing things like that?
I have not. I don't know if we have historically, but that certainly does seem advisable. That seems like a very good action plan so that we can not only keep that relationship from going stale, also letting them know how students have been. Yes.
Some of these people do this for a long time. I know we talked about it before, but if you put it in our notes, that's something somebody should do that somehow.
And it may be, I know the high schools are very engaged in the scholarship process. Maybe they do, but I will make a point of finding out what we do and if we need to, yeah, if we need to refresh those relationships. Oh, thank you, Angel.
We're just more like, do they know what their balance is? You know what I mean? Overall, like management. Okay. Yeah.
Like the Brightly scholarship's been on our books for a long, long time. Do we ever communicate with that family? Or do we just, someone thanked the family for what they gave this year, but what about their balance and nurturing that relationship? You don't do that, do you? Or do we?
I do have that on our list of items to follow up on. We need to do that because, yeah, we have it on. It was just that, honestly, with the delay in the treasurer, and I think it's Mrs. Drummy, but it's a little bit behind. No, it's on our to-do list, and I have a pile I've shown Felicia of items that we started collecting. But I think, as I recall, when we met and talked about this in the fall, it was to look at all the scholarships, see where the balances are. Can they continue to, I guess, when's the end date, and how often are we replenishing those? As well as the thank. I know Mrs. King and Mr. Busenberg did before the thank you as well too, but I think we need a more thorough job. We'll get that reviewed and get it to the board. It's that pile I showed you where I have collected, but it's on my to-do list.
Any other questions on that? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
And the next resolution, 24-06-113, to authorize the treasurer to submit to the Licking County Auditor the final appropriations and final amended certificate of estimated resources as of June 30, with submission of revised actuals to be reported at the next regular meeting for ratification.
If I can get a motion.
I'll make the motion.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. I kind of touched upon that when we were talking about other transfers and advances. It's just a statutory obligation. And
Any questions on it? Call the roll.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
And the last item, resolution, last item for me. Resolution 24-06-114, authorize FY25 temporary appropriations and estimated resources to provide for operations beginning July 1, with any modification to be reported at the next regular meeting for ratification.
Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion, questions? We know what this is. Let you pay the bills till we have the next meeting.
Keep the lights on.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Ready? Resolution 24-06-115 is approval of Wilson Foundation's material.
Can we get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Further discussion? We've had presentation.
Yeah, you've
presentation.
seen work session,
Right.
and then, or you've had work session, and tonight Mrs. Seibel talked a little bit more about it.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-116 is math modeling and reasoning training. And I would remind the board that for the 3 teachers, we're recommending a change from 2 days of compensation, $200 a day, to 4 days each.
Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? We know what this is. It's state mandated. Right.
Well, as a reminder too, this is one of our in lieu of classes now instead of Algebra 2. So I think with some of our career tech enhancements, workforce ready, this will be a better path to follow.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-117 is adoption of reading curriculum.
Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
Second.
I'll second.
And as a reminder, this is, again, the board's seen this, like you said, Mr. Swager, and then Mrs. Seibel covered this a bit tonight too, the wit and wisdom, and this will be for grades K through 5 and that slower rollout that she talked about.
Any other questions, discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-118 is the approval of district calendars. And as a reminder, that there are revisions to the 24-25, 25-26, and then a new calendar for 26-27 school year.
Can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
And
A second.
Any other discussion? I think we already asked the questions of Mr. Busenberg, so thanks for the work.
Just one question.
Oh,
Do we know who's on that committee? Because every time we approve this, I get feedback. Well, I don't like this year. I don't like that year. I'd like to let them know who is on the committee and how they can give their feedback. Just a thought.
Yeah, we have representatives from every building.
Teacher representatives from every building.
Yep.
Everybody knows who they are.
They should, yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
that's all.
I don't know what the communication stream is. Part of it, it's also tied in with the JEA, so maybe there's some flow of information there as well too. But we can talk to the principals. Next time we'll have one come up for review because we should be doing this again next year. We'll be thinking about 27, 28 at some point, so we can remind people. Hard to think about that 27, 28, doesn't it?
away.
Yeah. Well, but we do, it's so important to people because, if nothing else, think about people want to set their schedules, graduation, especially if they're coming from out of town. So.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-119 is overnight field trip for 8th grade students to Washington, D.C.
Can we get a motion?
I'll make the motion.
And a second.
Second.
Discussion? Mine's more of a question on this. Financially, I know we do scholarships. Do we have any kids not going on the 8th grade trip that financially can't make it work for them? I mean, I know academically we have some, those types, some that are choosing not to, but are we aware of, and if so, do we have an idea of how many kids may not be financially able to? Have we had any children apply and not get the? Do we know? I mean, yes.
Also, I had some outreach, Mr. Swacker, from American Legion. Yeah.
I kicked them over to you because
Yeah.
they were looking to help in this area to make sure no 8th grader couldn't go due to economic reasons. So the American Legion had reached out to me, and I had asked them to talk to Dr. Wagner about that. That's why I was asking those questions. Is there are opportunities and people willing to fund those in a true financial need, not a desire not to pay for it, but a financial need.
Yeah, I have to get back to the American Legion on that, but we will, I mean, if we can do more advertisement of it, and I'll pick Mrs. Allmendinger's history, and then I'll talk to Mr. Hancock too about ways we can move that forward. But,
If you would, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We just don't. I don't know what dollar amount we're talking, so it's hard when you're talking to people that are looking to donate. Is no one really knows what the need is versus what we have, and what's the gap. And that's really what they're asking: is what's the gap to fund that, if necessary, a roundabout number. So that's what we'd like to try to figure out if we wanted to make sure everyone got to go that wanted to go. So okay, thank you. Call the roll on that, please.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-120 is overnight field trip to the Ohio Leadership Institute.
We can get a motion.
A motion.
I'll second.
Any questions, comments? This group actually comes back and reports out very well on this, and
Yeah.
they're excited.
Yeah.
So this is one of my,
And they
You know,
enjoy it.
truly
Yeah.
enjoy the
Yeah.
group, and I know Mr. Barnhart enjoys going to that. So, any other questions, comments on this one? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer,
Yes.
Mr. Benton.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-121 are additional days for Mrs. Debbie Seibel.
Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
Can I get a second? Wait a second. This is for an additional 110 days. Is that what I read?
No.
Not 210.
Oh.
No, it's their
Oh,
additional
10 days.
10 days. Yeah.
Does that mean you're coming back full time or what?
Don't put pressure on Debbie. No, she's.
I thought it said 110 days. My eyes must have.
That's just to finish up this year. As a reminder, she helped a lot with
That's
transition.
parentheses. I
Yes.
see it.
Yeah, she helped a lot with transition, and we've been looking at her schedule. I know I gave the board an update, but I think that'll carry us through the end of July. And we put up to 10 days. We'll see if we need it all. So I still want Mrs. Seibel to have a balance in her life that we've talked about. Although we'd like to see her every day, we balance that. So.
Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Brewer,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis.
Yes.
I think
Miss-
it was Ann.
Oh,
It
it
was
was.
Ann.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sometimes if I'm not
Still
looking
vote
up, it's hard
yes.
to hear.
Well, and
Thank
the
you
air
for
conditioner decided to kick on. Sorry about that.
right. May I start the roll call again?
Sure.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Brewer,
Yes.
Mr. Swager.
Yes.
Resolution 23-06-122, classified salary base increases.
And can I get a motion?
Motion.
And can I get a second?
Second.
So what we proposed here is 4% in the coming year, 3% the year after, and 3% the following year. And that aligns with the teacher contract. And what we did was Schedule A in the teacher contract.
It's historic.
Or I'm sorry, Schedule B, I should say. Schedule A was different.
But, this is historically what we followed through with. So, any other questions, comments? Call the roll.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Resolution 23-06-123 are administrative salary base increases.
Can I get a motion?
I'll motion.
And can we get a second?
I'll second.
Again, this just follows the same as the previous resolution, and then also what Schedule B is with the teachers.
Any questions, comments on this? This, so the board knows, this is not something we've always done. We've always done it for the classified. The administrative side, we're doing it now, just so we've set precedents. Everyone understands why and what. But on this one, as I think everyone knows, we have a lot of new administrators in this district, and normally it's been on a more case-by-case basis and individually. But having discussed this, this is what they were recommending. Dr. Wagner was recommending following that across, making it across the board with everybody equally on this one. So that's how we got to this point. So the other, no, we're not setting precedent. That's what I'm saying. We're not. This is for the 3 years here, doing it this way, and then evaluate it after the 3 years are up, like we have in the past. But this is for those who've been on the board for a while. This has not typically been how it's been handled on the administrative side as much. But now that we've kind of reset everybody, and we've got, pretty much all new people everywhere at the administrative side, or will be.
Will be,
yeah. So, anyways, anyone have any questions, comments on that? All right, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-124 is the selection of a construction manager at risk.
Can I get a motion? And can we get a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Schweiger, can I read a larger, that's going to take me a couple minutes, but there's just some statute I want to put in here. There's a rationale behind this. And so the rationale for this is the board previously identified a need for the project. Next is the board requires the services of a construction manager at risk, coordinate, manage, perform, and direct all phases of the project for a guaranteed maximum price. Sections 9.33 and others of the Ohio Revised Code and Chapter 153:1-6 of the Ohio Administrative Code prescribe a best value selection process, which is required to be followed by public entities when construction manager at risk services are procured. Next, in accordance with the statutory process, the district publicly advertised and issued a request for qualifications for construction manager at risk services for the project. Several statements of qualifications were received from interested firms, which were reviewed, evaluated, ranked by the evaluation committee to create a short list of 3 most qualified firms. The district then solicited pricing and technical proposals from the shortlisted firms. The proposals were reviewed by the evaluation committee. Following the review of the proposals, the evaluation committee held interviews with the shortlisted firms. Next, after the evaluation committee's review and evaluation of the submitted proposals and interviews of the shortlisted firms, the evaluation committee ranked shortlisted firms based on their proposals and identified the CMR as the firm that would provide the best value for the project and recommends that the board approve this selection. In its pricing proposal, the CMR offered to perform pre-construction services for the project in the amount not to exceed $20,000, which is considered the pre-construction fee. Lastly, the superintendent also requests that the superintendent and treasurer be authorized to work with other administrators and legal counsel to negotiate an agreement for pre-construction services with CMR for the project, and that the superintendent and treasurer be authorized to execute the agreement for pre-construction services with CMR for the project in an amount not to exceed the pre-construction fee at the conclusion of satisfactory negotiations on behalf of the board. So therefore, it's recommended that the selection is for Robertson Construction Services as the best value construction manager at risk for the district improvements project and authorizing contract for pre-construction services. And I apologize for the length of that, but there's some statutory requirements.
All right. We have a motion. We can go right now.
All right.
Yeah.
I think on item 2 there, that should say or should include the strategic.
Well, we had the committee involved with the interview process as well too.
Right, but
Yeah.
we're saying that you're asking for authorization to sign this now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the dollar figure shouldn't change from what it is. We'd have to go back and ask the board. It would be not to exceed. The pre-construction is set, and then they have the other rest of it.
Could I say something like?
Sure.
Light is, could be straight handles on the JIS building, contract. Look at them. Do you like that, JIS? They are crooked. See that?
No.
No one in GIS is here. No one. Oh, dear. At any rate, if I hear about that once, I hear about it several times. And it's from parents, people who work in that building. We really need to do that. So
Yeah.
that's something we need to know.
Okay. I'll follow up on that aside from
I know
this.
you're doing everything else.
No,
to
no,
do,
no.
but-
No, this is good. We can follow up on this.
Well, they're going to be on site for a while. So
Yeah.
we'll have a captive audience.
And the process is, it's really, it's interesting because the architect process is different. We have a one session, and then when we have the construction manager at risk in this case. So we had the initial RFQ for request for qualifications, and we shortlisted. And then what we did is, I know you have some copies of this, but it's then we had the 3 shortlisted firms, the interviews that I talked about previously, and then we had the dollar figure. And Robertson actually is the most economical for our school district based on the project. So.
I understand that. Just-
Yeah. No, but I can follow up separately about the handles on the building.
Did Robertson think that they would be running into any issues with manpower since they have several contracts with several school districts going on or just being approved, not just ours?
No, what they didn't. They can meet the timelines. Really, what the greatest. Let me say this. They can meet the timelines as they're established, but we have to stage the project. So, first and foremost, is going to be that high school edition. They believe that they can meet our timeline and open a year from this fall, but it would have to be. There's some items that have to be taken into consideration. One is that we have to work with the architect and see about the drawings. So they're going to have to get at least 50% of the drawings in. So once we get everybody under the tent through these procedural things, then we'll start having meetings and get that moving. Just to geek out on this a little bit, if you will. Part of the thing we're looking at too is we don't have any swing space needed for this project, but we are going to think about at the high school, the staircase and how we manage that if we shut that down. So there's some alternates there. I'll just tell you this because we saw this in one of the meetings, and Mr. Schwager was there, but they actually look at possibly putting a staircase on the side of the building temporarily. We'd have to go out some windows on the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st floor, and then we would
They wouldn't crawl
cut
up.
off. Yeah. No. We would take out the window. They would install it doors, and then we would have that. But that's a way to keep us, because that, believe it or not, that space is a big issue. Next online comes the board office, and that it doesn't have the same urgency, so we're focused on the high school. And then we'll look at the auxiliary space we talked about, and then the PAC. We're going to need some help. Our committee's going to have to get together because we put this all together, because some of these could be happening simultaneously. There will actually be 2 superintendents from Robertson on this project, so some of this they can do concurrently, I'll say, but that's about as much as I know right now, unless somebody else was in the meeting and provide detail. So again, sorry, I know that's a long, drawn-out process and all this, but some of that's statutory, so I want to make sure to cover all that for the board.
Any other questions, comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Mrs. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Boer?
Yes.
Mr. Swager?
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-125 is for fiscal year 25 Northwest Ohio Computer Association Technical Services Agreements.
Can we get a motion? I'll make a motion. And a second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? We know what this is. Call the roll.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-126 is to approve fiscal year 25 with the Licking Regional Educational Service Center. It's the annual contract.
Can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
And a second.
I'll second.
I do want to thank Mrs. Strummy, Mrs. Seibel, Mrs. Wagner. They've spent a lot of time going through this contract, and actually will have fewer dollars dedicated, I think, for some efficiencies than we have in the past. But I know they've spent a lot of time in it.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Call the roll.
Is that Mrs. Thomas first? Yes. Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Benton.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-127, or second reading of revised policies.
Can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
And a second. Discussion? These are the second reading of, so I think everyone's seen them for a while now. Any questions, comments? Call the roll.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-128, or second reading of rescinded policies.
Can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
Second. Any discussion on these? These are just removing because they're more than 2 past due.
Yes.
I'll call it. Yep. Any questions on these? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-129, a second reading of review policy.
And can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
A second. Discussion on this one? Call the roll.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Resolution 24-06-130, second reading of replacement policies.
Can we get a motion?
I'll motion.
And a
I'll
second.
second it.
Any discussion on these? Is there a second reading of these we've been through? We can call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer.
Resolution 24-06-131, first reading of revised policies.
Get a motion?
I'll motion.
Second.
Discussion?
I thought we were going to review these in the work session before we brought it to a board meeting. And we haven't discussed these.
I have to join her on that because I'm going to have to abstain from these because I'm not familiar enough to say yes or no. I don't. And better to abstain than to approve something you really don't think that's
Can we do first reading at them next work session, then don't vote till next board meeting? Just a thought. I mean,
To do what? I'm sorry.
So if you vote on tonight,
night,
next
we'll
work
review
session,
it next
we go
work
over 'em,
session
and then,
before we final.
because they're not final with the first reading. Then the
But I
following,
think it sets a precedence. I mean, we've asked to have the discussion in the work session to be presented with the ones that you're going to bring to, and that's what the committees are for. And then they should come into the work session, similar to what we did with baseball. I just think we need to have time to discuss if there's any discussions.
I don't have a preference. I just am trying to keep in some of them in line with making sure we can get them for a final reading before school starts, because some of them in particular are related to transportation. So we'd like to make sure those, right? So I'm just trying to keep us a little bit in line with that.
So is that a problem? Mr. Wagner, if we delay, because it is going back to the school district, right?
Well,
What would the transportation be? Because you're not talking about buses to pick children up to come to school. You're talking about non-routine trips, vehicles other than school buses for transportation, and incidental transportation of students by private vehicle. Many of those are extracurricular.
Well, we're the ADA plus.
Oh.
I think, as I read, the transportation was able to.
Again, I think it was just more about having it finalized before we've got students back on students being transported again.
Have to agree with her, the president is here, because we just bring it in, we haven't discussed it.
It was actually on the bus. The girls' basketball team's already on camp. They drove separate.
I'm talking like soccer season starts 2 weeks before school there, so there'll be school.
But we'd be meeting at the, I think there's a meeting in January.
Yeah, but I'm saying you need full board meetings, unless we're going to put resolutions on the work session, which I'm not against. But
I see what you're saying now. Need 2 readings.
Yeah, 2 full readings to get through. So if you don't, that'd be July 3rd, and then you wouldn't pass it till
And the August 12th, which the school
is
starts.
after, right? It's
on the-
after the.
Why don't we put them on the work session?
And then it also.
I'm not opposed.
Doesn't it affect the district guidelines for how we're going to process work for each year?
So is it okay to put these on the work session and vote on the? Is there a time frame if we do it on the work session and then after we have the discussion, potentially vote on the first reading of the revised policies at the work session? Actually have an agenda
Can we do it that way?
item,
yeah, I can look at
And
that
then
and see.
still
the-
do the second reading as
Um,
planned at the July, whatever date that would be. Before
The,
calendar is.
yeah, the question, part of it becomes schedule, as you kind of talked about. I was going to ask you at some point too, if I want to get to my section, about possibly a special meeting within the next week, because I have some personnel matters that could come together relatively soon. And I think, as you know, we know this time of the year, so there might be another meeting. I was going to ask your schedules later today or early next week, if possible. Yes. Yes, as we get up.
I'm not concerned we are here staying on schedule, because I can't imagine not having it.
Yeah.
The issue for me though is when are you going to discuss these?
Right.
To have time.
So that's why I was wondering, can we do first reading, board meeting, or work session to discuss?
And then-
That will be before.
Approval is the following.
I
This
just,
is just the first
Our work
reading.
session's the 24th.
So, but again, if we approve it tonight, that doesn't mean that we approve the policies. That's just the first reading. The second time it comes up is when the official approval.
and I do think we've done that another time, to do first reading, work session, then second.
Could we look at,
I think that's how we've been doing those, first reading, work session, second reading.
July
So
22nd.
you know, if there's something that you don't like in it,
We
you
don't-
can change it.
we don't have the schedule.
For the
Because the schedules, we don't have one in July. We typically don't have a work session in July because of vacation schedules and all too.
You've been setting, is there something critical that you've changed that makes it a dramatic change, or is it just words, or how you do those things?
I think it depends, I mean, I don't have them in front of me, but I could, I think it depends on which one you're looking at.
So you probably don't want to do it live, but those are the packets that I gave you too, so you have some there to look at. Can we take a little tangent though, and would you have time, the board, to meet sometime this week? Because we could notice a meeting, we could cover policies, and I'm going to we can do like a mini work session if you want, but I'm going to need something for personnel anyways, either late this week or certainly early next week.
I can do any day but Friday. Are you?
Any day but Friday. Okay, so Friday
I
then?
could
No, just kidding.
discuss my phone in a car.
No. We have, what about Thursday? Can we do something at 5?
I can do
Thursday.
Thursday.
Okay,
That's fine.
that's going to give us, I might have to rearrange some other things on the schedule, but I'm going to try to get personnel items too if I can with that. So we could do a 5 o'clock meeting. Does that work for everyone? Okay, and then Amanda and Alan, I'll work with you and Derek, and we'll get a mini session on the policies, but also bring some personnel issues. Okay.
So do we have to officially?
And then are you going to keep the one on the 24th?
Well, there's two things you could, if you had a first and second
Yes.
on this.
Just on Q, not on RST.
Yeah.
Modify the motion.
You could also, well, you got to call the vote right there because you did a first and second.
Yep.
The other ones we could skip. Yeah.
Motion within the motion.
Yeah, you can do a motion. We put a
Yeah.
motion there.
Motion within.
So you should do one. So you could do a 131A, and it would be a motion to modify the board agenda. You'd have to get a vote on that. And then I think you'd have a 131B, which would be a motion to table 131 until further notice, I guess, at that point.
134.
Yeah, you could do that for 134 if you want.
Okay. All right. So I need a motion.
A motion.
Yeah. So you mean, yeah, so be a resolution
Motion to
24-06-131A will be a motion to modify the board agenda.
The board agenda. Removing items.
First, I think you want to be able to,
Motion.
you have to agree to change the
A motion
agenda.
to modify.
Yep.
Alan, also second motion to modify the agenda.
Right.
You call the roll.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton, Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Because that resolution is approved, yeah. And then you need a resolution, yeah.
Items Q, R, S, T from the agenda.
Or you could table them if you want. Yeah,
Table.
so you could have a motion to table resolutions 131, 132, 133, and 134.
Items 131, 132, 133, 134. If I can get a motion to table those items.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Call the roll.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Benton.
Yes.
Okay, and then just so it'll be this Thursday at 5 o'clock. Maybe we'll do that in my office, like a work session, if that's okay. I'm gonna make myself, yep. So we'll do policy, and then I'll get you any kind of personnel, so we'll notice it both ways.
And then Anne asked at the very end, we're still keeping the 24th though? Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unless the board wants to cancel it, but
No.
I think we'll keep
I
I was
the,
asking, I want to make sure it's
Yeah.
being heard.
you know what, I think I'm gonna need, sorry, real quick, I
So,
think,
excuse me, I want to make sure I have our schedule. So it's Thursday,
5 p.m.
5, and then we have another meeting later.
Our regular work session.
regular work session is the 24th.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. And then just ask for a little flexibility on that too, because let me see how personnel matters go. I think, so we should have, I'll send a notice out on this. So this Thursday, June 13th at 5 p.m. in my office, we'll build the agenda for that. And then the 24th, we'll get that as our regular work session. Okay,
With that, we're moving on to superintendent comments.
okay, let me catch up here. Okay,
What about?
a board comments?
Oh, you have
She does.
board comments. Sorry.
Board comments, sorry.
Go ahead.
You know, not the second.
One, I'd just like to say graduation was very nice. I know that it is a huge undertaking to do, and it takes a lot of people to put the graduation together. And some of the people aren't even at the high school and they participate and help out. So it was beautiful, and very glad that the grandmother was okay. And I would like to request that we recognize them and their children in the future. They don't forget that. We talked about that too.
Yep.
And the second comment that I'd like to make is I am very upset to know that our volleyball team at the high school has no coach, no practices are going on, and there would be free practices. But from my understanding, we've had at least when I look out, the employment. We've had the employment application out there since December, and we have a great bunch of girls that need a coach desperately. If anybody knows of a volleyball coach, anybody that would like to work with a great bunch of girls, I really impress upon them to reach out to Dr. Wagner, whoever.
Yeah, no, that's
To
fine,
reach
because
out
we have it up on Talent Ed. on our
To
website.
Dr. Wagner, I hate to say the word desperate, but I was very upset to see some of the comments online this weekend, and they should be upset or worried. And I don't know what to say. But I do feel that if this was a boys' sport, that they would already have a coach. If it was football, lacrosse, basketball, we would have a coach. And I don't think that we've given it enough attention.
I
Is
do.
anybody here aware that we didn't have a volleyball coach yet?
Yeah, fully aware. We've done interviews, had somebody lined up. She stepped down, didn't take the job. Yeah, we've been through a lot of different people. Tried to hire several different coaches. A couple of people didn't take the position. Another person didn't take a teaching position. So this has actually been a priority. And actually, in the athletic director interviews last week, that was the top priority question we asked the athletic director: is do they have people? So I would say I absolutely disagree that if this was a male or female sport, we're putting all of our efforts in and put it as our number one topic for our new AD when they come on board, that it is absolutely critical that they shake the trees, so to speak, and find, I mean, I won't say we said bring a coach with you, but we pretty much said, if you take the AD job, we want you to bring a coach with you because we know this is important. We've got a great volleyball team. We've got a great program. So, as I think anyone that knows me, most of my friends' daughters are playing on those teams right now. So I'm getting a lot of phone calls about this as well. So we know it's a high priority. It's a priority for us, but we can only interview the people that apply for the job. And if they don't take a teaching position, as the one person chose not to, and she was out of state, I believe, if I recall, she was like in West Virginia, decided not to move to the area. So pretty good potential as a coach there. So we've reached out to a lot of different people. And this isn't just the varsity program. There's several positions we have to get filled within volleyball and other sports. But I'd say volleyball is by far it's the only one that got brought up in the athletic director interviews that I'm aware of was the volleyball position. So I will say we are definitely, it's a high priority, and I know we are pushing on it, but I'd echo what you said. If anyone knows anyone that is a volleyball coach or wants to be, certainly reach out to us. And I'm optimistic that our potential candidates have people that they may be able to bring into the community that can help fill that position.
I do want to compliment Mrs. King and Mr. McDonald because we've been pushing on our social media. Started that a couple weeks ago, I think, and even trying to get out there. Also, Mrs. Thomas called me today and even offered, hope I can say this, but offered to even start as a volunteer just so we can get practices started.
I mean that.
No, I know you do. And
I mean
actually, Mr. Busenberg and I were talking about it today. So I said to you in an email response, we may take you up on that offer.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
My
the board
schedule
being,
is very clear now.
yeah, I appreciate the
I
board
have
being
all my
solution oriented. So at least we can try to get everything organized there, even from a volunteer standpoint. So
But I am serious. I would do that. And I do think they are
Yeah.
deserving of it.
yeah.
And we have to get something going for them soon.
I would offer this, I think it's fairly universal in society. It's hard to find high-fill positions. And, I can tell you from an education standpoint, because that's what I do most of the time, obviously, is looking at our pools are much thinner than they have been. People less likely to change districts, and that happens in the coaching ranks as well, too. As Mr. Swagger said, we have been pushing in every interview. In fact, Mrs. King brought it up at an interview last week, like, do you know anyone? And so we have been working hard because we think our students deserve it, but we also want to get them somebody who's properly trained in that sport. So.
Any other board comments, questions? Moving on to the superintendent.
A couple reminders. One is June 19th through 22nd is the Fireman's Festival. So I have that on the agenda here. And then also the Fireman's Festival Parade is on June 22nd. I believe it's on July 4th. We call it fireworks is on July 5th, I believe. which is Friday.
Yeah, it's
Right.
July 5th.
Thank you.
July 5th.
Thank
You are correct.
That's
Thank you.
what I'd heard too.
Yeah.
July 5th.
Yeah.
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 Don't say July 4th. It's
No, what
July 5th.
I think we've been saying that because you call it July 4th, but
Right.
it's the
People
July
will
4th
be here on
celebration.
July 4th.
It was easier last year when we did in September, and we said you didn't get confused with the same month. No, it wasn't really because we had to do the second date.
Yeah.
Did want to comment on graduation also. I thought it went exceptionally well. And Mrs. Thomas, I'm glad you brought that up. And I know it was brought up earlier tonight too. Mr. Busenberg and I and some others are going through just trying to recreate that night and look at what happened because, and there's some people who want to recognize for that. I know Mr. Swager and I were talking, and it was impressive to see those who work for Columbus jump in and watch what they were doing. Crowd responded well. I mean, I don't know how much better something like that could have handled as challenging as that was. I went back and watched the video, and the crowd was well maintained and took almost 15 minutes. So that was, and then people jumping in, and there's different people to celebrate. So,
I watched the video. Does that count?
yeah, no, I think it does because, like I
You were
said,
supportive of Boise. I've been watching.
yeah, no, I think that was great. I was glad you used the link then. So there's that. And speaking kind of back to personnel, do want to highlight there are some positions we're getting close to filling, and that's the athletic director position. We're in finalist rounds there. We have the GIS principal. We're near finalist rounds there. And then the Johnstown Middle School Dean of Students, we have that position we're getting close on. And then we have a few others. We have intervention specialist, and then English language learners, REL. And also look what I had in the volleyball coaches. So right on my notes as well too. So we're continuing to try and fill open positions, and that meeting later this week will help us get some of those buttoned up, and then we can focus our efforts on others. And that's all I have, I think, on my notes, unless there's questions.
Questions, comments? We can get a motion to move into executive session for purpose.
Yeah, we have two items for executive session. One is for consideration of appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official. And the second reason is discussion with the board's legal counsel of disputes involving the board that are of subject of pending or imminent court action. And Mr. Swager, do not anticipate asking the board for a vote after the executive session.
If I can get a motion, please,
I'll motion.
and a second.
Second.
Questions, comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Davis,
Yes.
Mrs. Boer,
Yes.
Mr. Benton,
Yes.
Mr. Swager,
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.